Hi, and welcome to Mrs. PM Reads. We are continuing, for a place to set this down, we are continuing in The Magic Circle by Katherine Neville. And in our last video, Joseph of Arimathea is reading Mary Magdalene's letter and out loud with the druid present. So he's asking questions. And Mary's letter reveals something that's not in the Bible, a story that Jesus supposedly mentioned to the disciples about the 13th child of Israel, Dinah. And so not the 13 tribes, because those are the 12 tribes, those were the sons, right? But there were 13 children, one of which was a girl. So that's where we are. And so the druid is asking questions about it, and Joseph of Arimathea is about to explain. So this section is called the 13th tribe. The story begins with our ancestor Jacob as a young man. Twice, Jacob had tricked his older twin brother Esau out of his birthright. When he learned Esau had threatened to kill him as soon as their father died, Jacob fled the land of Canaan and headed north to the country of his mother's tribe. Arriving in the mountains near the Euphrates River, the first thing Jacob saw was a beautiful young shepherdess who brought her sheep to a well, and Jacob fell in love with her. As it proved, she was his own cousin, Rachel, the younger daughter of his mother's brother, Laban. At once, Jacob asked for her hand in marriage. So way back then, that was an okay thing to do. Jacob worked 7 years for his uncle to earn Rachel as his bride. But the dawn after his wedding night, he learned he'd been tricked. The woman he'd lain with that night, substituted under the cover of darkness for Rachel, was her squint-eyed older sister, Leah. For it was the custom in the north to marry off the eldest first. When his uncle Laban offered Jacob Rachel as his second wife, Jacob agreed to pay her dower by toiling 7 years more in her uncle's fields. The number 7 is also a key number in our people's history. God created the world and took his rest within 7 days. The number 7 marks the fulfillment and completion of all creative undertakings, the number of divine wisdom. It is therefore significant that 7 is the birth sequence of Jacob's only daughter, as are the key events leading up to her birth. While God ignored Rachel's desire to have children, her sister Leah gave birth to 4 sons. Rachel offered to her husband her servant Bilhah, who gave birth to 2 more sons. Because Jacob no longer came to Leah's bed, she offered her own servant Zilpah, who likewise had 2 sons by Jacob, while the unhappy Rachel still remained barren. But things were about to change. One day, the oldest son, Reuben, found some mandrakes in the wheat field and brought them to his mother, Leah. Mandrakes, like May apples, promote conception and are associated with the temptation of Eve. Rachel asked Leah to share them, but Leah would agree only in exchange for Jacob's restored services as a husband. The desperate Rachel said yes, after which Leah gave birth to 2 more sons. And then the vital event was about to occur. Leah's 7th and final child, the 11th of Jacob's children, was a girl, who was given the name of Dinah. Upon Dinah's birth, Leah's fertility and Rachel's barrenness were both at an end. Rachel's firstborn son, Joseph, later viceroy of Egypt, therefore became Jacob's 12th child. And the final child was Benjamin, whose birth resulted in Rachel's death and the end of the family cycle. His number was 13. The sequence in which the children were born, the way each was blessed by Jacob before his death, and even the way in which the tribes were later blessed by Moses in the desert, are all known to be important in the history of our people. But Dinah herself does not reappear in the story until her father Jacob returns from self-imposed exile in the north and brings his family back into the land of Canaan. Jacob brought land from the local prince, Hamor, and dug a well that's still there today at the foot of the sacred Mount Gerizim, and settled in with his family in the land of Canaan. Goodness. Where does the pronunciation go on all those A's? When Dinah went through the wheat fields one day to meet some of the local maidens, Hamor's son Shechem saw her and wanted her, and he defiled her there in the field. But when Shechem realized he was in love with Dinah, he took her home and asked his father Hamor to arrange that they might marry. When Hamor went to Dinah's father and her brothers, he offered to share half of his estates if they'd permit the marriage. Jacob and his sons agreed, only if all males of the Canaanite clan would agree to be circumcised as Jewish covenant requires. But two of Dinah's brothers were lying. For no sooner had the Canaanite men undergone surgery than Simeon and Levi fell upon their households, killing all the men, removing Dinah forcibly from the house of her captors, looting and destroying the houses, and making off with the women and children, sheep and oxen, and material wealth. Jacob's family was forced to flee Canaan in fear of retribution for this deception and bloody massacre. So that's all actually in the Bible, that whole story. We know two more things regarding this tale. Jacob and his family left Canaan never to return. Near the well he dug there, Jacob's well, grew the oak of Shechem, where Moses would one day instruct the Hebrews to build their first altar upon their return from Egypt to the promised land. Beneath that now famous tree, Jacob buried all the clothes and jewelry and treasures and even the statues and idols, all of the belongings of his wives and concubines and servants and the captives from Canaan, so that each might put on clean clothes and begin a new life before starting into the land of his father's people. Between the land of Canaan they'd left behind and the land of Judea that lay before them near Bethlehem, Rachel gave birth to the 13th and last child, whom she called Benoni, but whom Jacob named Benjamin, and then she died. Okay, where are we? 10 minutes. Let's look real quick. Oh, okay, we'll finish. And what of Dinah, the cause of all these changes in fortune, these beginnings and endings and reversals of fate? Asked Lavernius when Joseph had finished this tale. We'll never know how she felt about the treachery that had been done by her brothers in her name, for this is the last time she is mentioned in Torah, said Joseph. But the objects that were buried beneath that oak are often called Dinah's legacy, since they changed the destiny of the Hebrew people from what it might have been, stripping them of their past and even their identities. From that day, nearly 2,000 years ago, when they left Canaan, modern Samaria, and entered Hebron, now Judea, they were reborn into a new and different life. Do you think this was the hidden message of Jesus of Nazareth? Lavernius asked, to strip ourselves of our past and be reborn to a new way of life? That's what I hope to learn from the contents of these cylinders, Joseph replied. I believe by this woman's letter, I can already guess what was in the mind of Jesus of Nazareth and why he told that tale to his disciples, said the prince. It has to do with the well of Jacob you spoke of and the tree. Joseph looked into those deep blue eyes, nearly black pools in the firelight. My people have oak trees too, my friend, said Lavernius, groves of them, each with its sacred well, fed by a sacred spring. And in each of these holy spots, we pay tribute to a special goddess. Her name is neither Dinah nor Diana, but it is Danu of my own tribe. For instance, the Tuatha De Danann are the people of Danu, which seems rather too close for chance. Danu is the great virgin, mother of all found waters, that is, fresh waters like those of springs and wells. Her very name means the gift, for such water is life itself. And we pay tribute to her as much as your ancestor Jacob did. Only we don't bury our treasure under an oak. We throw it down the well near the oak, where it's received into the waiting arms of the goddess. But you can't really think the master's final message was, Joseph began, what you might call heathen or pagan. Lavernius finished for him with a wry smile. I fear you never understood him, any of you, even since his boyhood. You saw him as a great philosopher, a mighty prophet, a savior king. But I saw him as one Philly or seer regards another with unveiled eyes, naked as it were. Naked as when we come into the world and naked as when we die. A Philly can see the raw soul of another, and his soul was ancient, your Jesus of Nazareth. But there was something more. Something more? Said Joseph, though he was half afraid to ask. The Prince of Foxes gazed into the fire, watching the sparks that crawled like living things across the ground before slipping soundlessly into the black night sky. Joseph felt his skin prickle in anticipation before hearing the druid's whispered words. He has a god in him. Joseph felt his breath let out suddenly, as if he'd been struck by a sharp blow. Blow, not glow. A god, he said. But Lovern, you know, for our people, there can be but one God, King of kings, Lord of hosts, the one whose name is not spoken, whose image is never graven, whose breath created the world and who creates himself simply by saying, I am. Do you suggest that God might actually enter into a human being? I'm afraid I saw his resemblance to another God. Ooh, the prince said slowly, for even his name is that of the great Celtic god, Isis, Lord of the netherworld, of wealth sprung from the earth, human sacrifices, or more properly, those who sacrifice themselves to Isis. Okay. So we're going to skip that couple of lines there, description. Wotan, a god to the far north. Oh yeah, we're going to skip that too. And okay, your Isis of Nazareth hung for 9 hours, but the idea is the same. I believe that he was a shaman of the highest degree, but he sacrificed himself to enter the magic circle where truth resides, in order to achieve divine wisdom and spiritual immortality. Sacrificed himself, and for wisdom, for some kind of immortality, cried Joseph of Arimathea, leaping to his feet in agitation. It was true, the Romans spoke of human sacrifice among the Keltoi, but this was the first he'd heard a Druid mention it. No, it simply isn't possible. Joshua may have been a master, but I raised him. I thought of him as my only child. I knew him better than anyone. He could never have turned his back on mankind or turned away from his life's mission of seeking the salvation of his fellow beings through love right here on earth. He strove always toward life and light. Don't ask me to believe that the master would engage in some dark barbarian ritual to invoke the bloodthirsty gods of our ancestors. Lavernius had stood too. He put his hands on Joseph's shoulders, searching his eyes deeply before he spoke. But that's exactly what you do believe, my friend, he said. When Joseph stepped back in protest, Lavernius added, "It's what you've feared all along, isn't it? Or why did you wait until James Zebedee's departure before opening those clay cylinders? Why bring me from the Isles to be here beside you when you open them?" Without awaiting Joseph's reply, the prince reached down and picked up the net filled with clay amphorae, holding them near the fire to study them. "Our only question now is whether to read these or to burn them," he told Joseph. "Your master has taken a path I know well, you see. Among our people, only those who are chosen by destiny may follow the path of a druid, of a messenger to the gods. It's a path that prepares one for the self-sacrifice that I think your Isus always intended to make in behalf of mankind. Such a path, as I've said, also confers upon the messenger the true wisdom and true essential to the completion of such a goal. But there is another path, a path far greater danger, but bringing with it, if successfully carried out, vastly greater knowledge and power." "What sort of power?" asked Joseph. Lavernius set the net down and regarded Joseph grimly. "We must find out exactly what those objects were, the ones burned by your ancestors beneath the roots of that oak tree in Samaria, and where they are today, whether they have indeed remained underground throughout these past 2 millennia, as I greatly fear they have not. For I suspect the story of Jesus of Nazareth intended to tell is not as simple as the rape, of Dinah and the revenge wrought by her brothers. I think the kernel of truth in his story relates to a larger kind of transformation, and that the objects Jacob buried may be the key to the mystery." "But it is I who told you about those things," said Joseph. "The master never spoke of them. Besides, they were only clothes and jewels and personal treasures and the servants' household gods, and they've been buried for 2,000 years. So how could they relate to transformation, much less explain the master's actions? You said the place they were buried was beside a sacred well and beneath a sacred oak, and the reason they were buried was to change the identity of the tribes descended from Jacob. This suggests they were not merely personal goods, but talismanic objects invested with the charism of each individual member of the tribe," said Lavernius. "The initiate who's chosen that most difficult path I spoke of must first have possession of such talismans. They must be united in communal force during his invocation of the ancient mysteries. I feel certain this was your master's objective. And if he elected to follow this path in behalf of your people, He himself must have obtained possession of your ancestors' talismans. But whether he failed or succeeded in his final goal of transformation, now these objects must be returned to the earth again at once to propitiate the gods. I don't understand, Joseph protested. You suggest the master dug up objects that may have been buried for millennia, or perhaps never even existed, in order to gain for himself some mysterious power. But Lovern, during his life, the master was capable of such feats as raising young Lazarus from the dead. And after his own death, he appeared to Miriam as in real life. What greater powers could there be than those he already held? The last flickers of fire had burned low, and by unspoken agreement, the men started to break up the coals and prepare to return to Joseph's ship. Lavernios hefted the net with clay amphorae, slinging it over his broad shoulders. Joseph could now see only the outline of the other's muscular form. Lavernios's voice came softly out of the darkness. When I told you that your master was possessed by a god, I fear I was not completely clear, he said. Instead, the Druid believed that one is required to be a god in order to bring forth a new age. And that's we're going to jump forward a year in the next section. So that finishes AD 34. Ooh, that's a lot of information. I'm not sure where that's going. Although it does mention all the things that Lucky mentioned to Lafcadio, Ariel's uncle, Laugh, right? So, all right, you guys. Well, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.